My name is Helen Carter. I'm 66 years old, and last month I stood outside my own kitchen window, listening to my only son calmly explain how he and his wife were going to drug me, have me declared mentally unfit, and get me out of the way so they could grab my new inheritance. They weren't whispering. They were planning my disappearance like it was a home renovation project. Before I tell you how I turned their scheme inside out and watched my own child get led away in handcuffs, I want to know something from you. From which city and country are you watching this? Tell me in the comments below. I genuinely read them. And if you believe that no amount of money justifies betraying the people who raised you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new tale of justice, payback, and hard-earned peace. Now let me take you back to the day everything changed. On the day I thought my life was finally turning a corner, I came home humming to myself. It was one of those damp spring afternoons in upstate New York, the kind where the sky can't decide whether to drizzle or stay gray. I just left the office of a quiet, efficient attorney in downtown Rochester, clutching a folder in my purse that confirmed something I'd never expected to see in my lifetime. I was about to become a very wealthy woman. My older sister, Margaret, had died 3 weeks earlier in Vermont. We hadn't been close for years, not since her second marriage and a move to a lakeside resort town where she reinvented herself as a boutique hotel owner. I stayed in our modest suburb outside Rochester, worked nights as a nurse, raised my son, and paid my bills on time. We sent Christmas cards and the occasional birthday text. That was it. And yet, for reasons the attorney could only shrug at, Margaret had left almost everything to me. A lakeside lodge in Vermont, fully paid off, and 3 small apartment buildings on the east side of Rochester she'd quietly bought over the years. After debts and taxes, her estate was worth just shy of $4.5 million. $4.5 million. I kept touching the folder in my purse as I walked from the driveway toward my back door, my mind racing ahead. I saw repairs on my peeling porch, freedom from worrying about whether the furnace would survive another winter. Maybe even help for my son, Daniel, and his wife, Kelsey, who had been temporarily living with me for the past 9 months after his tech startup collapsed. I'd already rehearsed how I'd tell them. I'd keep it simple. I have some good news. We'll be okay. You'll be okay. Margaret left me more than I'll ever need. I was actually excited to see their faces light up. That was my mood when I rounded the corner of the house. Then I heard Daniel's voice through the open kitchen window. I'm telling you, this is our chance. Once the guardianship is in place, the lodge, the rentals, everything is effectively ours, he said. His tone was low and controlled, the way he used to talk through code problems late at night. We get her into assisted living. We handle the money. She can't blow it or change her will if she doesn't have legal capacity. My feet stopped moving. The wet grass soaked through my shoes, but I didn't feel it. I eased backward until my back pressed against the siding. My heart started pounding, not fast, but hard, each beat like a fist. Kelsey's voice followed, sharp and impatient. And if she refuses to see the doctor? She's stubborn, Dan. You saw what happened when I suggested hiring a financial advisor. She practically bit my head off. That's why we're doing it this way, he said. Dr. Langley understands these situations. He does competency evaluations all the time. We get her there, he does his little test, and then writes that she's no longer able to manage complex finances. We take that to the court with the petition. Simple. Simple, Kelsey hissed. And what if she catches on? She used to work in hospitals. She's seen all this stuff. We'll make sure she doesn't, he replied. A mild sedative in her tea before the appointment, just enough to make her seem confused and out of it. Langley will see what he expects to see. Once the paperwork is done, we can move her to the memory care place I told you about. They specialize in dementia. Residents don't sign anything. They just exist. It's clean. The word clean made my stomach flip. Clean, like a solved equation. Clean, like taking out the trash. Dan, Kelsey said, dropping her voice. Are we really talking about putting your mother in a home? I mean, she changed your diapers. She helped us with the down payment on the condo. Then, after a beat, she added quietly, and yes, she's the reason we lost it when she stopped helping. My cheeks burned, so that was how they saw it. Daniel sighed. She's the reason we're stuck here right now. She wouldn't co-sign that last loan. She wouldn't give us anything from her retirement, even though she has enough. Now she's sitting on a fortune she doesn't know what to do with, and we're drowning. This is math, Kels, not emotion. She's old. She's alone. She forgets things all the time already. We're just formalizing reality. The worst part was how reasonable he sounded. If I'd been a stranger walking by, I might have thought he was talking about a patient, not his own mother. Besides, he added, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Once this is done, the rentals can cover the care home easily. We keep the lodge for us, a real fresh start. No more bill collectors, no more couch surfing in her drafty museum of a house. Kelsey laughed softly. You and your numbers. I pressed my hand over my mouth, afraid the sound of my breathing would give me away. Then she said, almost playfully, Okay. So how do we formalize reality, Mr. Genius? Walk me through it one more time. I stayed frozen in that damp strip of lawn, listening as my son calmly explained, step by step, how he would erase me while I was still alive. By the time I finally moved, my fingers were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. I didn't go through the back door. I went back to my car instead and sat there, staring at the raindrops on the windshield, realizing that everything I thought I knew about my future had just changed. And not because of the money, because of who my son had chosen to become. What I didn't know yet was that the skills I'd gained over 40 years of caring for vulnerable people were about to become my only defense and my weapons. To understand why that conversation under my window broke me the way it did, you need to know who Daniel used to be. I had him when I was 27, in a small maternity ward in a town outside Syracuse. His father, Mark, was there for the delivery and gone within a year. Some men get spooked by colic and tiny screaming lungs, I guess. He eventually remarried in another state and started another family. Child support was spotty. Calls are even spottier. So it was just me and my son. I worked nights as a nurse because it paid a little more and because someone had to be there when Daniel came home from school. I slept in pieces, between shifts and PTA meetings and basketball games. I learned how to stretch a pack of chicken thighs for 3 meals and how to smile when the light bill came with red letters on it. But Daniel, he was worth every bleary-eyed morning. He was bright, curious, the kind of kid who took apart radios just to see how they worked. In middle school, he taught himself basic coding from free websites on our ancient desktop computer. By high school, he was building websites for local businesses and talking about Silicon Valley like it was a promised land. I couldn't give him much, but I could give him belief. You're good at this, I'd tell him, watching his fingers fly over the keyboard. But remember, being good at something and being good are not the same thing. Keep both. He'd roll his eyes. I know, Mom. Don't turn evil for money. Got it. College was a patchwork of scholarships, loans, and my savings. I picked up extra shifts, sold my wedding ring, cut out every luxury that wasn't soap or electricity. When he graduated with a degree in computer science, I looked at him in his cap and gown and thought, we did it. Not you. We. He landed a job at a mid-sized software company in Buffalo. Steady pay, benefits, and a decent apartment. That's where he met Kelsey. She was different from the girls he'd dated before. Polished, confident. Her father owned a small chain of auto dealerships. She didn't flaunt it exactly, but wealth clung to her like expensive perfume. I tried not to feel out of place when I met her parents at the engagement dinner. They talked about ski trips and investment portfolios and framed charity gala photos. I talked about the hospital and the time we'd had a blackout and delivered a baby by flashlight. They were polite. I was careful. The first real crack appeared 2 years into their marriage when Daniel called to say he'd quit his job. Quit? I repeated, tightening my grip on the phone. You left voluntarily? It's a startup, Mom, he said, excitement buzzing in his voice. My friend Chris and I have been working on this platform idea for months. We've got early interest from an angel investor. This could be big, really big. I don't want to wonder what if for the rest of my life. Did you talk to Kelsey? I asked. Of course, he said. She believes in me. What he didn't mention was that she also believed her father's money would always be there to cushion a fall. My nurse's brain, trained to anticipate worst-case scenarios, screamed in the background, but I swallowed my fear and said, if you've thought it through, I'll support you. Within reason. Within reason, turned out to be a moving target. The startup ate their savings first, then their lines of credit. The angel investor backed out when the market dipped. They refinanced their condo to keep the company afloat. When the pandemic hit and interest rates went wild, Daniel's dream finally collapsed. They lost the condo, the car. Kelsey's father helped, but there were limits. Pride has limits, too. That's how they ended up at my front door one chilly October evening, each holding one side of an overstuffed duffel bag. Just for a little while, Kelsey said. Her mascara was smeared. Daniel's shoulders were slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Until we get back on our feet. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door wider and hugged them both. I squeezed twin air mattresses into my tiny spare room, cleared space in my pantry, and told myself it felt good not to eat dinner alone. At first it did. We cooked together, watched shows together. Kelsey and I drank tea at night and swapped stories about our days while Daniel scoured job boards. I told myself this was a chance to reconnect, to be part of his adult life in a way I'd missed while he was chasing tech dreams. But as months passed, the edges started to fray. Job interviews didn't turn into offers. The bills went up. The tension did too. I overheard more than one argument behind their closed door. You could ask your mom, Kelsey would say. She's sitting on retirement funds. She has the house free and clear. She doesn't even travel. She's not a bank, Daniel would answer sharply. She's worked like crazy for what she has. I'm not going to bleed her dry just because I failed. I should have clung to those words, but something else was happening at the same time that I didn't want to see. Resentment creeping in behind his loyalty. The longer they stayed, the more my home became a symbol of everything he'd lost and didn't have. Then the call about Margaret came. Heart failure from a sudden arrhythmia. A life built in another state, another world, wrapped up in legalese and notarized signatures. When I told Daniel his aunt had died, he hugged me. His eyes were wet. They'd always been close when he was young. Then he asked, almost casually, "Did she leave anything? I mean, are they contacting you?" At the time, I chalked it up to practical concern. Funerals cost money. Estates needed to be settled. I had no idea, standing at the sink with my hands in dishwater, that my sister's decision was about to pull a mask off my son I wasn't ready to see. I didn't tell them about the inheritance right away. Part of it was shock. Part of it was superstition. Nothing felt real until I signed the paperwork. So when I left for the attorney's office that gray afternoon, I told them I had a meeting about Margaret's estate and promised we'd talk later. I thought later would be filled with relieved laughter and plans. Instead, later came early in the form of their voices through my kitchen window, and every sacrifice I'd ever made as a mother suddenly felt like a ledger someone else had scribbled over in red ink. I wish I could say I marched back inside and confronted them right then, righteous and shaking, but I didn't. Old habits die hard. In a crisis, nurses don't scream, they assess. So that's what I did. Sitting in my car with my hands clamped around the steering wheel, I began to assess the situation like it was a case, not my life. What exactly were they planning? And how could I make sure I was the one holding the pen when this story reached its final page? I drove without really choosing a direction until I ended up in a small park near the Genesee River, the one with the duck pond and the bench that always tilts a little to the left. It was where I used to take Daniel when he was little to feed stale bread to the ducks and talk about dinosaurs. Now I sat there alone, watching a pair of teenagers share earbuds under a tree, the world moving along like my life hadn't just detonated. I took my phone out twice to call him and put it away twice. I could hear my own voice, the way it would crack, the way anger would take over and say things I couldn't unsay. Instead, I slipped into the mode I knew best: clinical. When you work in a hospital for 40 years, patterns of abuse and exploitation stop looking dramatic and start looking familiar. The son who keeps forgetting to refill his mother's medications. The niece insists her aunt signs anything I put in front of her. She trusts me, while the aunt stares blankly at the wall. The friend moves in to help out, and suddenly the patient's bank account is a sieve. We'd had mandatory trainings on elder financial abuse. The first time I sat through one, I remember thinking, I'm glad Daniel isn't like that. I'm glad I raised him better. Now that memory made me feel nauseous. I pulled a small spiral notebook from my purse, the same one I used for grocery lists and medication reminders for my patients and wrote at the top of a fresh page, Daniel and Kelsey, 421, kitchen conversation. Underneath, in neat block letters, I wrote everything I could remember from what I'd heard. Guardianship, competency evaluation, Dr. Langley, sedative in tea, memory care facility, formalizing reality. Old, alone, forgets things all the time. Seeing it in ink made it feel less like a nightmare and more like a case file. That helped. It gave me something to push against. I flipped the page and started a new list. What they think is true. I'm alone. I'm forgetful. I'm emotionally attached to them. I don't know the law. I trust doctors. I don't have anyone else. Then I wrote, what is actually true? I'm alone, but not helpless. I misplace my glasses, not my mind. I'm emotionally attached, but I can detach. I know enough about elder abuse to teach a seminar. I trust good doctors. I can spot bad ones. I have old colleagues. I have numbers. I have time. A raindrop hit the page and made one of the bullet points blur. I swallowed hard and added the last line. I am the only person in this situation who is truly on my side. It was a bleak sentence, but it cleared my head more than any pep talk could have. They were planning to drug me. That was not love. That was a crime. They were planning to manipulate a doctor into declaring me incompetent. That was not concern. The Onda concern. At was strategy. 9 months earlier, when they'd appeared at my door with their duffel bags, I'd taken them in without a single condition. Now they were calculating how to get me out of my own house and into a locked ward, just to get their hands on money they had not earned. The part of me that still saw Daniel at 8 years old, knees scraped, running to me with tears on his face, wanted to cling to excuses. He's desperate. He's scared. Kelsey is pushing him. The economy is bad. Startups fail. People panic. But the nurse in me had seen too many bruises from bumping into things, and too many empty pill bottles, because I must have taken them already, to flirt with denial for long. You can acknowledge context without ignoring harm. I tapped the notebook with my pen. If any of my patients told me this story, what would I tell them? I knew the answer immediately. I would tell them to document everything, to talk to someone who understood the law, to never go to a specialist alone if they didn't fully trust the person who recommended him, to protect their assets before someone else did. Once I framed it that way, my next steps stopped being abstract and started feeling like a checklist. Find out who Dr. Langley is. Talk to someone who knows guardianship law. Secure my accounts and legal documents. Gather evidence before confronting them. Stay physically safe until I know how far they're willing to go. The last one made me shiver. Would they really hurt me? No, I thought automatically. Daniel would never. Then I remembered the way he'd said formalizing reality and how casually he'd talked about drugging my tea. They had already decided to hurt me. They just wanted to do it in a way a judge would sign off on. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath, the kind I'd coached anxious patients through 1,000 times. In through your nose, out through your mouth, Helen, I whispered to myself. You are not powerless. You are precisely the woman they should never have underestimated. I opened my eyes and stood up, slipping the notebook back into my purse like it was a shield. I didn't know exactly how I was going to stop them yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being just someone's mother in this story. I was going to be my own advocate, and I was going to treat Daniel and Kelsey exactly the way I'd treat any other abuser who walked into my hospital smiling. With documentation, strategy, and a willingness to let the truth do the talking. The next morning, I did something that probably saved my life. I called Patty Reynolds. Patty and I had met 20 years earlier when she was a brand new social worker at the hospital. Back then, she wore her badge on a lanyard covered in cartoon animals and cried in the supply closet after her first elder abuse case. Over the years, I'd watched her harden in all the right ways. She didn't cry anymore, but she never stopped caring. We had drifted a bit after she left to work for the county's Adult Protective Services office, but we still exchanged Christmas cards and occasional "Did you see this nurse meme?" texts. She was the one person I knew who understood both the medical and legal sides of what Daniel was planning. I dialed her number with trembling fingers. She picked up on the second ring. Helen, hey stranger, you okay? That question always sounds casual until you actually answer it. No, I said. My voice cracked on the word. And I think I'm technically one of your cases now. She didn't laugh. Where are you? Home, I said. But I can meet you anywhere. Come to my office, she replied immediately. 1 hour. Don't talk to anyone about this until I see you. Bring any notes you have. An hour later, I was sitting in a drab county office that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet cleaner, watching Patty's face go from curious to grim as she read my notebook. Guardianship, she muttered. Sedative, hand-picked evaluator, memory care placement. God. She closed the notebook carefully and looked up at me. Okay, she said. So I'm going to talk to you as your friend first, then as a mandated reporter. As your friend, I a concern. Friend, I am so sorry. As a mandated reporter, we friend, I reporter, we need to treat this like an active financial exploitation case, which means we start a file, we notify law enforcement, and we make sure they can't move faster than we do. I swallowed. Law enforcement? Patty, that's my son. She didn't flinch. And you know as well as I do that if this were Mrs. Jameson in 4B telling you her nephew was planning this, you'd be the first one on the phone to me. The fact that it's your son doesn't make it less dangerous. It just makes it more painful. I looked down at my hands. The skin on the back of them was thin, Veriporter, wethin andined. Nurse's hands. Mother's hands. Hands that had held fevers and sutured wounds and wiped tears. I tried to imagine them in restraints, shaking in some facility while strangers decided if I was agitated enough to need more medication. You're right, I said quietly, and I hate that you're right. She reached across the desk and squeezed my fingers. You're allowed to hate this and still do the smart thing. We spent the next hour building what she called a safety net and a trap. First, she walked me through the basics of guardianship in our state. It was designed to protect people who truly couldn't make decisions for themselves anymore. People with advanced dementia, severe brain injuries, D-thin and injuries, or developmental disabilities. People like many of my former patients. In the wrong hands, though, she said. It's a sledgehammer. You lose your right to sign contracts, manage money and injuries or money, and decide where you live. That's why judges are supposed to be careful. But if someone comes in with a signed medical evaluation from a credible doctor and a polished story about concern, and no one is there to contradict it, cases slip through. Like Mrs. Greer last year, I said slowly, remembering one of the stories she'd once told me over coffee. Her son put her in a home 3 towns over and sold her house in under a month. Exactly, Patty said. We got that one reversed, thank God. But it took months. You don't have months. They're already talking about appointments and tea and formalizing reality. We need to be ahead of them. Being ahead, it turned out, meant 3 main things. Securing my legal and financial position. Gathering evidence of their intentions. Making sure someone official knew what was happening before Daniel and Kelsey made their move. First, Patty said, pulling a pad toward her. Do they have any power of attorney documents for you on file? I froze. I gave Daniel a durable power of attorney a few years ago, after my hip surgery, just in case. My lawyer said it was smart to have someone who could sign for me if I was under anesthesia or something. Patty's expression tightened. Where is that document now? He has a copy, I said slowly. The lawyer has the original. Okay. Step 1. You call that lawyer as soon as you leave here and revoke it. Today. You're competent, you're aware, and you're concerned. That's enough. You can appoint a different agent or just leave it blank for now. It felt like peeling off a bandage. So I take that power away from him. Yes, she said, firmly. Because that power was given in trust, and he's about to use it to hurt you. You are not obligated to hand him the knife he wants to use. Second, we talked about my accounts. Do they know your online banking login? She asked. I don't think so, I said. But they've used my laptop, and I keep passwords written on sticky notes in the desk drawer like an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're a person who didn't expect her family to turn on her, Patty said. Go home, change every password, enable two-factor authentication, tell your bank you suspect potential exploitation, and ask them to flag any unusual transactions. Then she leaned back in her chair and switched into full investigator mode. Now, evidence, she said. You overheard one conversation. That's good. But it's not enough to bring to the DA. We need more. Luckily, they think you're clueless. That's in your favor. It felt strange to hear my own supposed limitations listed as tactical advantages, but she wasn't wrong. Can you get a recording of them talking about this? She asked. I thought of how loudly Kelsey tended to talk on the phone and how Daniel paced when he was stressed, circling the kitchen like a shark. Yes, I said slowly, if I had something to record with. Patty opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small object wrapped in bubble wrap. You didn't get this from me, she said. But it's voice-activated. Put it somewhere in the common area. It'll pick up anything within 15 feet when someone speaks. Bring it back to me tomorrow. We'll pull the audio and see what we have. I turned the little recorder over in my hands. It looked like a cheap USB drive. It felt like a lifeline. Finally, she talked about law enforcement. I'm filing an internal report today, she said. I'll mark it as high risk because of the plan to drug you. That's not just financial abuse, that's physical harm. I'm also calling a detective I trust in the financial crimes unit. We've worked together on guardianship scams before. If you're willing, he'll want to meet you. What happens if I say yes? I asked. He'll listen, she said. He'll probably tell you what I'm about to tell you. The best way to shut this down is to let them walk straight into a situation that proves their intent. If they're already planning to take you to this Dr. Langley with you drugged and disoriented, we can be there when the money changes hands and the papers are signed. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I pictured my son sitting in an interrogation room, listening to his own voice played back to him. I pictured Kelsey trying to explain to a judge why a loving daughter-in-law needed to sneak sedatives into her mother-in-law's tea. My stomach lurched. Patty, I whispered. I don't know if I can do that. Go along with it. Pretend. You did night shifts for decades, she said softly. You held the hands of people who were dying while their families argued in the hallway about inheritances. You've kept your face calm while delivering the worst news. Don't tell me you can't act for one more day to save your own life. Her faith in me settled somewhere deep. I left her office with the recorder hidden in my purse, a list of tasks on a folded scrap of paper, and the kind of buzzing numbness that only comes when you realize your life has turned into a story you used to warn other people about. I changed my power of attorney that afternoon. My attorney, a brisk woman named Ms. Tran, didn't ask for details when I said I wanted Daniel removed as my agent. She just looked me in the eye over her reading glasses and said, "Are you under any pressure to keep him there?" "No," I said. "Good," she replied. "Then we'll update this today. You're not the first parent to quietly change these things. You won't be the last." By the time I pulled back into my driveway, the rain had stopped. The sky over the little street I'd lived on for 30 years was a flat, indifferent blue. I sat in the car for a long moment, fingers resting on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of the recorder in my pocket and the new documents in my bag. I wasn't ready to confront my son, but I was ready to listen. and for the first time since I'd heard his voice through that window, I felt something besides shock and grief. I felt a plan forming. That night, I played dumb. When I walked into the kitchen with a grocery bag, Daniel looked up from his laptop at the table. Kelsey stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled like tomato sauce and garlic. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said. "How did the estate meeting go?" I set the bag on the counter and forced my voice to sound casual. "Long and boring," I said. "They love their paperwork, those lawyers. Nothing's finalized yet. I'll tell you when there's something to tell." Kelsey's shoulders eased fractionally. They exchanged a quick glance they probably thought I missed. I pulled plates from the cabinet, my movements deliberate and slow, letting my hand brush lightly along the edge of the bookshelf as I passed. The tiny recorder Patty had given me was already wedged behind a row of cookbooks, its little LED light off, its voice activation waiting. We ate dinner like any other night. We talked about nothing and everything. Kelsey complained about a rude customer at the coffee shop where she'd picked up part-time shifts. Daniel mentioned an online coding test he'd taken for a possible contract gig. I nodded in all the right places. I laughed when they expected me to laugh. It was only when I stood to clear the plates that Daniel made his move. "Mom," he said, "you've been more forgetful lately. Have you noticed?" My hand tightened on a fork. "Forgetful?" "Yeah, like yesterday," he said. "You left the stove on after boiling water, and last week you missed your dentist appointment. It's just little things, but it happens more and more." The stove story was true, but incomplete. I'd turned one burner on low to heat soup, and Kelsey had cranked it up to make it boil faster, and then walked away. The dentist appointment had been rescheduled because their car had blocked my driveway, but I'd let the receptionist blame miscommunication. "I'm 66, Daniel," I said. "Not 16. Brains get tired. So do bodies." Kelsey stepped in, her voice soft. "We're just worried about you. Especially now with everything going on with your sister's estate. It's a lot to manage." I dried my hands on a dish towel, buying half a second. "There's this specialist I read about," Daniel said, leaning his elbows on the table. "A geriatric psychiatrist. He does assessments for older adults, makes sure everything's okay, catches issues early. It might be good to get checked out, just for peace of mind." "Peace of mind for who?" Whom?" asked, keeping my tone light. "For all of us," he said. "You, us. It's just smart to have a baseline. With everything, whom?" "Everything, Mom," he corrected himself. "With everything Margaret left you, it's important to show the court you're totally fine, so no one can challenge anything later." The lie was almost elegant. He had taken the truth, that I had inherited more than I'd ever expected, and twisted it into a justification for the very trap he was trying to set. "What's this doctor's name?" I asked, rinsing a plate. "Langley," Kelsey said too quickly. Then catching herself, she added, "A friend from the cafe told me about him. Her grandfather went, and it really helped organize his care." I let the water run. "Care," I repeated. "That sounds serious." "It's just a word," she said. "You know how the medical system is. Everything is care now." I could feel their eyes on my back, gauging my reaction, testing how much resistance they'd face. In that moment, I realized something important. They weren't just cruel. They were careless. They'd already convinced themselves that this was inevitable, that I would go along because old people do. I turned the faucet off and took a breath. "Fine," I said, turning around with a sigh I didn't have to fake. "Make the appointment." But I'm not taking a bunch of pills I don't need just because some stranger likes to diagnose people. Daniel's shoulders relaxed. Kelsey smiled. Of course not, she said. It's just an evaluation. They thought they'd won a small battle. In reality, they'd just given me a date for the ambush. 2 days later, the recorder in the bookshelf gave me exactly what Patty and her detective friend had hoped for. I waited until they left to run errands on a drizzly afternoon, then pulled the device out with trembling fingers. It felt warm, full. At Patty's office, we plugged it into her computer and watched the files populate. Timestamps, durations, lit everything, durations, Antle audio ghosts of my shared kitchen. We listened. Most of it was normal life. Clattering dishes, Kelsey humming off-key to a pop song, Daniel complaining about his laptop fan. Then we hit the 10-minute segment that changed everything. Did you talk to Langley? Daniel's voice asked. He can see her Friday morning, Kelsey replied. He said if she seems off, he'll write the report we need. But he wants $500 up front. $500? Daniel scoffed. For 30 minutes of asking what day it is? He's sticking his neck out, she said. Those evaluations get scrutinized. He doesn't want questions. And he said if she's too sharp, he can interpret things in context. Whatever that means. There was a pause, the sound of a drawer opening. What are you doing? Daniel asked. Just checking her pill bottles, Kelsey said. See if we can crush something into her tea without her noticing. Maybe the pain meds from her hip surgery. Those made her loopy. She barely uses those, he said. We need something stronger. Langley said a couple of his colleagues use Ativan or Ambien. He knows a guy who can get samples. So we drug her with samples and then take her to him, Kelsey asked. Are you durations and are you sure you want to do that? You were the one who said we can't afford to wait, Daniel snapped. Creditors keep calling. Your dad is done helping. My mother is sitting on a house, a lodge, and rental income. We're on a couch. Do the math, Kels. This is our shot. After everything she didn't give us, she owes us this. Owes us, Patty repeated quietly in her office, pressing pause. There it is. We listened to the rest in a kind of horrified silence. Them discussing how groggy I had seemed after my last dose of painkillers, how confused I'd been when I lost my keys, and how emotional I'd gotten when the furnace repair bill came. Everything they planned to use against me, they'd been rehearsing for months without me realizing. When the recording ended, Patty blew out a breath. Okay, she said. This is more than enough for probable cause. I'm sending this to Detective Morales. Within an hour, I was sitting in another windowless room, this one at the police station, across from a man in his early 50s with kind eyes and a folder full of my life. Mrs. Carter, Detective Morales said, I wish I could tell you I haven't seen this kind of thing before, but I'd be lying. The difference here is that you came to us before they actually pulled it off. That makes this a lot easier to prosecute. Prosecute, I echoed. The word tasted strange. I'd used it on Rangers for years. Now it might apply to my son. He opened the folder and slid a form toward me. This is a formal statement authorizing us to investigate. Patty's report and the recording will be attached. I want you to read it and sign if you agree. My hands shook a little as I picked up the pen. Somewhere under all this, the idea of snitching on my own child scraped against old instincts. Mothers protect their children, mothers forgive, but mothers also know the difference between a tantrum and a threat. I signed. Good, Morales said. Here's what I'd like to do next. Over the next half hour, we built a plan that mirrored Daniel's in eerie reverse. He wanted me drugged before I saw a doctor. We would secure a sample if he tried and test it. He wanted a friendly evaluator to misrepresent my mental state. We would be listening in the hallway with a warrant when the cash changed hands. He wanted a guardianship petition rubber-stamped by a judge. We would be waiting in the clerk's office with a competing report and a pile of evidence. The harder part wasn't the legal choreography. It was the emotional performance. I would have to act exactly like the confused, grateful, slightly overwhelmed woman they thought I was. "Can you do that?" Morales asked finally. I thought about every shift I'd worked where I'd had to walk into a family meeting with a neutral face while knowing the outcome was going to be bad. I thought about the time I'd held a mother's hand while she signed "Do not resuscitate" orders for her teenage son, keeping my own hands steady so she didn't see mine shaking. "Yes," I said quietly. "But afterward, I'm going to need to fall apart." "You'll have earned it," he said. The next few days felt like living on a stage I hadn't auditioned for. On Thursday night, Kelsey appeared in my doorway with a smile that sat wrong on her face. "Hey, Helen," she said. "I made chamomile tea. Thought it might help you sleep. Big day tomorrow with the doctor, right?" My pulse jumped, but my voice stayed calm. "Thank you, dear," I said, taking the mug from her hands. The tea was slightly cloudy, with a faint film on the surface that chamomile shouldn't have. My nurse brain cataloged it instantly. Sedative, crushed, poorly. "Drink it while it's hot," she said. "It works better that way." I watched her walk back down the hall, then closed my bedroom door and set the mug on my nightstand. For a long moment, I just looked at it. Then I pulled out the small evidence kit Morales had given me. A sterile vial, a pair of gloves, and a label. It felt surreal, doing this in my own bedroom, with a knitting basket in the corner and my grandchildren's school photos on the dresser. I put on the gloves, poured half the tea into the vial, sealed it, and wrote the date and time on the label with small, precise letters. The rest I poured down the bathroom sink, rinsing the mug and refilling it with plain hot water from the tap. When I walked back down the hall and set the half-empty mug in the sink, Kelsey glanced over from the couch. "All gone?" she asked. I said. "You were right. It's making me sleepy already." Her smile flickered with something like satisfaction. "Good. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a lot." "You're right," I said, which was true in a way she couldn't imagine. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Kelsey's soft snoring drifted down the hall from the spare room, I stepped out the back door and met Morales by the fence. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans, his badge tucked away. "Got it?" he asked. I handed him the vial. "If you tell me it's just powdered sugar, I might actually laugh." He didn't. "We'll rush the test," he said. "You're still okay? No symptoms?" "None," I said. "Other than wanting to sleep for a week for entirely different reasons." He hesitated, then said, "Tomorrow, when they take you to Langley's office, I'll have 2 officers and a recorder in the hallway. We'll have marked bills in an envelope if they try to pay him. You just do what you've been doing. Let them think they're ahead." "And if something goes wrong?" I asked. He met my eyes in the dim light. "You call me. Or you say the phrase we talked about." "I'm feeling really dizzy," I recited. "The one I'm definitely not allowed to use unless I actually want SWAT in the waiting room." He smiled briefly. "Exactly. We're not letting anything happen to you. I promise." The next morning, Kelsey woke me up with a knock that was too cheerful. "Rise and shine," she sing-songed. "Dr. Day." I rubbed my eyes and made a point of moving slower than usual. When I forgot my glasses on the dresser and doubled back for them, she tisked softly. "See?" she said to Daniel. who waited in the hallway, keys in hand. She really does forget things. I wanted to snap that forgetting glasses is not the same as forgetting your own name, but I bit my tongue. Let them narrate. Every word would sound different in court. In the car, they put me in the back seat so you can stretch out, Mom. I sat quietly, counting turns in my head, watching landmarks. We drove into a part of town I didn't know well. Older brick buildings, empty lots, a pawn shop, and a payday loan storefront. Not the kind of place most people would go for cutting-edge medical care. Seems, a little rundown for a specialist, I said mildly. His office is older, but he's really good, Daniel said quickly. He keeps costs low for seniors. I almost choked. Costs are low. $500 in cash for a 30-minute lie. We parked beside a 2-story building with a faded sign that read, Medical Suites. Inside, the hallway smelled like disinfectant and something fried from the diner next door. The waiting room for Dr. Langley, Adult and Geriatric Psychiatry, was half lit, with magazines from 3 years ago on the table. No other patients, no receptionist. Just a closed door. Daniel squeezed my shoulder. I'll go see if he's ready, he said. As he stepped through the door, I caught a glimpse of a man in a white coat. Late 50s, thinning hair, a face that looked like it usually avoided eye contact. Kelsey sat beside me, crossing her legs, her ankle bouncing. Are you nervous? She asked. A little, I said. I've never been to a psychiatrist before. They're just doctors, she said, trying for a soothing tone. They ask questions. You answer. It's no big deal. No big deal, I thought, if the goal is health. It's a very big deal if the goal is control. The door opened again. Mrs. Carter? Langley's voice was smoother than I expected. Practiced. I pushed myself up slowly, leaning a little on the arm of the chair, adding a touch of stiffness to my gait. Not because I couldn't walk fine, but because frail was the costume they expected. Inside his office, the blinds were half closed. Diplomas lined the wall behind his desk. A single framed photo of a beach looked like it came with the frame. He gestured to a chair. Please, have a seat. Your son and daughter-in-law tell me you've been having some trouble with memory. I sat, adjusting my sweater. I misplace my keys. Sometimes my words come out slower. I'm old, doctor, not broken. He smiled politely. Of course. This is just an evaluation, Mrs. Carter. To document how you're doing. It can actually protect you legally. There it was again, the twist of truth into something else. He started with simple questions. My name, the date, the city we were in. Then he moved to more complex tasks, subtracting by sevens from 100, recalling a list of 3 words after a delay, and drawing a clock. I answered everything correctly, but I sprinkled in hesitations at the edges. A frown here. Sorry, can you repeat that? There. Enough to fit the picture Daniel had painted without actually stepping outside reality. At one point he asked, "Who manages your finances?" I do, I said. I pay my own bills. I balance my own checkbook. And your son helps? He prompted. Occasionally, I said. When I let him. His pen paused for half a second. That small flicker told me more about his ethics than anything else. He had a script in his head already. I had just deviated from it. The session went on, for 25 minutes. At the end, he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Why don't you wait in the lobby while I discuss my impressions with your family?" That was my cue. In the hallway, Morales and his partner waited out of sight, their recorders running. They were about to hear exactly what kind of impressions money could buy. I sat back down in the waiting room, hands folded in my lap, heart pounding so hard it made my vision throb. Through the thin wall, I could hear muffled voices. Daniel's lower register. Kelsey's is the sharper one. Langley's smooth, professional tone. Shows some mild cognitive impairment, he was saying. Nothing dramatic, but enough that a court would likely agree she needs help managing complex finances. I almost laughed. Of course. The magic phrase. That's what we were afraid of, Kelsey said, injecting just enough fake sadness to make me want to throw something. Can you document that? Daniel asked. In a way a judge would understand? There's a standard capacity form I use, Langley replied. I'll note that she's oriented but shows deficits in executive functioning. Difficulty managing complex tasks, susceptible to undue influence. It should support a limited guardianship petition at minimum. Possibly full, depending on the judge. And the fee? Daniel asked, his voice dropping. There was a rustle of paper. This was the moment Morales had been waiting for. The 500 we discussed, Langley said quietly. Cash is easiest. After that, any ongoing consultation will be billed through my office. I heard the unmistakable sound of an envelope being slid across a desk. That was when the door slammed open. Police! Morales' voice rang out, firm and clear. No one moved. For a second, everything went silent. Even the hum of the building seemed to pause. Then chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Papers fluttered. The waiting room door flew open, and an officer stepped in, hand resting on his holstered weapon. Mrs. Carter, are you okay? He asked. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I'm fine, I said. I think they're the ones who aren't. In Langley's office, the scene looked like something from a bad TV show and a worse dream. Daniel stood by the desk, his face drained of color, one hand frozen halfway between his pocket and the surface where an opened envelope lay. Around it, spread like cheap confetti, were crisp $20 bills stamped with tiny blue marks on the corners, the pre-marked evidence Morales had prepared. Kelsey sat in a chair, eyes wide, one hand over her mouth. Langley stood behind his desk, his white coat suddenly making him look more like a butcher than a healer. Morales stepped between them, badge out. Dr. Thomas Langley, he said, voice steady. You are under investigation for participating in a conspiracy to fraudulently declare a competent adult incapacitated for financial gain. He turned to Daniel. Daniel Carter, you are under investigation for attempted elder financial exploitation and attempted administration of a controlled substance. Kelsey's chair creaked as she lurched to her feet. Wait, what? This is a misunderstanding. We were just worried about her. This is how guardianship works, isn't it? You get evaluations and... You get honest evaluations, Morales cut in. Not ones you buy with cash and sedatives. Daniel's eyes snapped to mine. Mom, he said, what did you do? The question landed with a bitter kind of irony. What did I do? I repeated quietly. I listened. I wrote things down. I talked to people who spend their lives protecting people like me from people like you. That's all. Langley tried to recover some semblance of authority. This is ridiculous, he said. I perform legitimate assessments. I have done nothing wrong except accept a fee for my time. Morales lifted the envelope carefully with gloved hands, turning it so Langley could see the tiny blue marks. These bills are pre-marked and recorded as evidence, he said. So is the audio of you agreeing to tailor a report to fit their story. So is the recording of them planning to drug Mrs. Carter to impair her before your evaluation. You can explain your legitimacy to a judge." He nodded to his partner. "Cuff him." As the officer moved behind Langley, Daniel took a step toward me. "Mom, please," he said, voice cracking. "You can tell them this is all a big mistake. You know I'd never really hurt you. We were just scared, desperate. You were going to help us anyway, right? We just pushed too far." He looked younger than he had in years, not the confident man who'd pitched investors, not the bitter man who'd moved into my spare room, but the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. For a second, my heart lurched in my chest, torn between memory and reality. "You bought sedatives," I said. "You talked about locking me away in a place where I just exist. You called what I've worked for my whole life something I owe you. That's not desperation. That's entitlement with a pharmacy receipt." Tears filled his eyes. "I was going to take care of you," he insisted. "Better than you could take care of yourself. You're getting old, Mom. You can't do this alone. The money is mine," I said softly but firmly. "Not because I deserve it more than anyone else, but because my sister chose to leave it to me. That doesn't magically turn into your ticket out of your own bad decisions." Morales stepped between us slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As his partner read Daniel his rights, cuffing his hands behind his back, Kelsey rounded on me. "You didn't have to do this," she hissed. "You could have just given us what we needed. We could have all been happy. Now look, you've destroyed your own family." Her words sliced, but they didn't land where she intended. "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed this when you decided I was a problem to solve instead of a person to love. I'm just making sure you don't do it to anyone else." They led Daniel and Langley out through a back exit to avoid the few patients still shuffling down the hall for other appointments. Kelsey, it turned out, had left a long digital trail in the form of emails to Langley, text messages to Daniel, and a search history that read like a how-to guide for exploitation. She would be arrested later that day at my house, after detectives executed a search warrant. As I watched the door close behind my son, the room seemed to tilt. Morales turned to me. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know what that word means right now," I said. He nodded. "That's fair." He offered me a seat while other officers gathered evidence, Langley's partially completed report, the marked cash, and my test vial, which the lab had confirmed contained a crushed benzodiazepine. "You did the hard part," he said after a while, sitting across from me. "You believed yourself. You didn't let them gaslight you into thinking you were crazy. That's more than some people manage. Believing in myself." It sounded simple. It felt like walking across a tightrope over an ocean. When they drove me home in an unmarked car, the street looked the same. My maple tree still leaned slightly over the sidewalk. The neighbor's dog still barked at anything that moved, but the air felt different. The house I had once thought of as my safe place had been a crime scene for weeks. Now it was a little closer to being just a house again. Mini CTA, the fallout didn't end with that arrest. Trials, family reactions, inheritance decisions. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up. If you've ever wondered what happens after the revenge, keep listening, because that part was almost harder than the sting. The legal process moved slowly, the way it always does, grinding ordinary lives into filings and dates on calendars. Daniel was charged with attempted elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, and attempted administration of a controlled substance. Kelsey faced similar charges, plus an additional count of evidence tampering when detectives found she'd tried to delete messages from her phone after the arrest. Langley was charged with fraud, accepting bribes, and falsifying medical records. The local news picked up the story in a small way. Psychiatrist accused of aiding elder exploitation scheme. But my name stayed out of it. I was a Rochester area woman, a faceless victim in a city full of worse headlines. At home, the silence was deafening. The spare room they'd used still smelled faintly of Kelsey's floral shampoo. There was an imprint on the couch cushion where Daniel had sat most evenings, laptop on his knees. I found one of his hoodies draped over the back of a chair days after he was taken away, and I stood there holding it like a relic. Patty checked on me weekly. Morales called when there were developments. Ms. Tran, my attorney, helped me file restraining orders and update my will. On paper, I was more protected than I'd ever been. Emotionally, I felt like someone had taken scissors to the family tree and left raw edges where branches used to be. The first time the prosecutor's office asked if I'd be willing to testify, my throat went dry. "You'll likely have to," the assistant DA said gently over the phone. "The recordings are strong, but hearing from you about the impact matters. You won't be alone up there. We'll prepare you." "I've been in courtrooms before," I said. "As a witness for patients. Not like this." "It's never easy," she said, "but it's important." In the weeks leading up to the trial, I found small ways to ground myself. I went back to the park by the river, not to plan this time, but to breathe. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center, my hands shaping clay instead of holding worry. I volunteered for a shift a week at a senior center downtown, helping with blood pressure checks and bingo nights, reminding myself that I still had skills that mattered. The first day of Daniel's trial, I sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, my notebook in my lap even though I had nothing left to write. When they brought him in, dressed in a suit instead of a jumpsuit thanks to bail money from his father in another state, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, sharper, years of worry carved into months. He glanced at me only once before looking away. Kelsey sat beside her attorney at the defense table, her hair pulled back, her makeup muted. The confident woman I'd first met at that noisy engagement dinner seemed far away. Langley's trial would be separate. Different docket. Different day. For now, this was about my son and his wife. When they called me to the stand, my knees trembled. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And for the first time in my life, those words felt like a shield instead of an obligation. The prosecutor asked gentle, structured questions. "Mrs. Carter, can you describe your relationship with your son before these events?" I talked about dinosaurs and science fairs, about college graduations and proud phone calls. I watched the jurors' faces soften. "And can you describe," she asked, "how you first became aware that your son and daughter-in-law might be planning to gain control of your assets without your consent?" I told them about the open window, about the phrase formalizing reality, about the way my knees had almost given out in the wet grass. We played portions of the recording in court. Hearing Daniel's voice talk about sedatives and guardianship in that clean, bright room with flags on the wall felt surreal. The jurors frowned. One shook his head slightly. The defense tried to frame it as talk born of fear, the kind of venting people do when they're overwhelmed. "Did my client ever actually administer sedatives to you?" Daniel's lawyer asked on cross. "No," I said, "because I didn't drink them." He tried to twist that too. So you can't prove there was any intent to harm, only that there were theoretical discussions. Correct? I looked past him at the jurors. I worked as a nurse for 40 years, I said. When you see people planning to mix sedatives with age and vulnerability, and to take them to a doctor who will say whatever they paid him to say, you don't call that theoretical. You call it what it is: dangerous. There was a murmur in the gallery. The judge banged his gavel lightly. "Order," he said. When it was over, I stepped down from the stand feeling like I'd left pieces of my heart behind with every answer. The jury found Daniel guilty on the main charges. They recommended leniency because he'd shown remorse, a detail that made my stomach twist. Remorse or regret at being caught? I couldn't tell. Kelsey was also found guilty, though she received a slightly shorter sentence. Their lawyers talked about appeals. The judge talked about the seriousness of exploiting family trust. He mentioned a troubling trend of adult children treating their parents' assets like entitlements instead of inheritances. When the bailiffs led Daniel away, he turned to look at me one last time. There was no rage there, no begging, just a kind of hollow disbelief, like he'd finally realized that actions have consequences even when you're desperate. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just stood still, my hands clasped, letting the moment pass. Life after that felt strangely flat. I moved through the steps of settling Margaret's estate like a person following a recipe. Go to Vermont. Sign papers. Decide whether to sell the lodge or keep it. Meet property managers for the rental buildings. Choose new passwords that didn't have my son's birthday in them. People kept telling me I'd won, that justice had been served, that I'd done the right thing. They weren't wrong. But every time I stepped past Daniel's old hoodie on the back of the chair, the victory tasted like something burnt. It took almost a year for the dust to fully settle. Langley lost his license and his freedom. Daniel and Kelsey went to prison. Appeals were filed and denied. The news cycle moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. In my quiet house, I learned how to be a person again, not just a patient in waiting. I sold Margaret's lodge to a local couple who wanted to run it as a retreat center for caregivers. Something about that felt right, like closing a circle. I kept 2 of the rental buildings and sold the 3rd, putting the proceeds into a trust. Not for Daniel, not for Kelsey. For people who reminded me of the patients I'd spent my life caring for. With Ms. Tran's help, I set up a small foundation in Margaret's name that provides grants to older adults who need help paying for in-home care or legal fees to fight exploitative guardianships. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was practical, concrete. The kind of thing that makes futures possible. When I signed the documents, Ms. Tran slid my new will across the desk. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. She'd seen countless families leave everything to children who didn't deserve it, and a few like mine who chose a different path. "Yes," I said. In that will, Daniel's name appeared only once, in a clause that said explicitly he was to receive nothing. The bulk of my estate would go to the foundation, with specific amounts set aside for a couple of nieces on my ex-husband's side who had visited me twice since the arrest, bringing coffee and awkward hugs, unsure what to say, but there anyway. I also left something intangible, a letter, one for Daniel, one for Kelsey. I don't know if they'll read them. Maybe they'll tear them up. Maybe they'll tuck them into some drawer in whatever halfway house they land in after release, unable to face the words for years. In Daniel's, I wrote about dinosaurs and graduation and how I'd meant it every time I said I was proud of him. I also wrote in plain language that love does not mean erasing yourself so someone else can live more comfortably. That I hope prison teaches him something about humility and empathy that life didn't. In Kelsey's, I wrote that I had once been glad my son had found someone who believed in his dreams. That I wished she'd believed in herself, enough to stand up to him when greed took over. I mailed the letters to the prison, registered and documented, then let go of what happened next. I won't pretend I'm over it. That's not how betrayal works. It leaves scar tissue that pulls in strange weather. Sometimes, when I see a woman my age holding hands with a son in the grocery store, laughing over coupons, something twists in my chest. I let myself feel it. Then I remind myself of what else is true. I am alive. I am in my own house because I fought to be. I am not sitting in a locked ward somewhere, over-medicated and ignored, wondering why my son doesn't visit. On certain evenings, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, plain, unclouded, and watch the sun set over the maple tree. Neighbors walk dogs, kids ride bikes. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounds. Sometimes my phone buzzes with an email from the foundation's director. "Mrs. Carter," it might say, "your grant helped Ms. Johnson hire a part-time nurse so she could leave an abusive home situation." Or, "Mr. Alvarez used his funds to pay a lawyer who stopped his nephew from selling his house." Those messages don't erase what happened to me, but they make something out of the ashes. People often ask, when they hear my story, "Would you do it again? Turn your own son in?" For a long time, I didn't know how to answer. Now I do. Yes, I say. Because the alternative wasn't keeping my family. The alternative was losing myself. If you've listened this far, maybe you've seen shadows of your own life in mine. Maybe you've felt that sick twist of doubt when someone you love talks about your money like it's theirs. Maybe you're younger, wondering how you'll treat your own parents when they can't move as fast or think as sharply. Here's what I learned the hard way. Love that depends on control isn't love. It's possession, and you are not an object, even if the person trying to own you shares your DNA. If you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, I hope you remember this. Write things down. Talk to someone outside the family. Believe the pit in your stomach. You are not crazy for noticing patterns. You are not ungrateful for protecting yourself. And if you're on the other side, if you're tempted to think of a parent's savings as your solution, ask yourself how you'll feel if someone one day treats you the same way. Because time moves in circles. And the way we handle power now echoes forward more than we realize. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, please like this video, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and tell me in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Your stories, your opinions, your courage, they're what turn tales like mine from just pain into something bigger. A reminder that justice isn't always loud, but it is always worth fighting for.